Hello, I am Víctor Paredes and I want to show you some of the new tools coming with Moho 14.3 Mantis Shrimp. This is a free update for all the owners of Moho 14 and I am personally very happy with this update. We were working for a long time in this and we are very excited to finally show it to everyone so everyone can start creating things with this. We call this update Mantis Shrimp because we think it's a very cool animal, and also it punches very hard and it's very colorful, so it makes sense for it to be the mascot of this update, very related to color. But also it's the animal that can see the biggest amount of colors in the entire world, so that is pretty amazing. So this character actually sees colors that we cannot even imagine. So I don't know how this Mantis Shrimp actually sees the Moho interface, but yeah, we thought it was cool to have a mascot for this update. It made sense. So I want to start with the main feature coming with Moho 14.3, which is the updates to the brushes. So I want to start with opacity. So when you draw in Moho, you can use the Freehand tool. In this case, I'm going to show you how to work here with the Freehand tool. And you can select a brush, so you just go here. I am on a vector layer here, so and I am also on frame 0, so I can just select a brush here. Let's say I will pick this one. Okay, I won't modify any value for now, so I press OK. I can use the Freehand tool to draw, and you can see that now in this version, the less pressure I apply, the more transparent this line is going to be. Okay, so you can draw wherever you want here with any color. I will right click here to change the color, and you can see how I have control of the opacity with the pen pressure. Okay, so that is the opacity. I will show you how to animate this, how to play with this. But the nice thing about this is that if I look at the points of this, you can see this is actually all vector. I am not drawing bitmaps, and that means that I can modify these vectors. So I can change the position, I can change the curvature, I can change the line width of it, and I can change many other things that I will show you later. But you can see how this is all vector. So our idea is to bring new tools for the vectors to look as natural as possible. So you get the flexibility of using vectors, but with the look of bitmap software or natural painting. So the other option I want to show you here is the new color drift. So you can see here we have the brush and we have this blue color applied to it. So now if I open the brush again, I will open the properties here. We have a new section here called color drift, and actually we have a new preview. If you use an older version of Moho, you will see that this looks different, and actually the brush shows you how it looks with some transparency here, and in this extreme it will show you the color drift. So with this new option I can change the hue of this. So let's say I will put a number here, and you can see how the color is changing here when I modify the hue. So let's say I want this kind of pink here, so I can change the hue, I can change the saturation, and I can change the value, which is the brightness of the color. So you can select these values here, and what the software is doing is that your brush has an original color, which is the blue, and if you apply all these numbers over the blue color, you will get pink. Okay, so that is the idea. You are not picking the pink color, but you are picking these numbers instead. So those numbers transform the blue into pink. Alright, this will make more sense in a minute. So I press OK now, and now if I paint, I still have control over the opacity. So if I don't press too much, you will see lower opacity, but if I start pressing more, you see how I get the secondary color here. So now I am painting with less opacity, it will be blue, and with more opacity it will be pink. Okay, so I can just paint with that, and you can see how now the brush looks much nicer because I have these two colors being combined here. And of course, again, this is all vector that I can modify, I can play with it in different ways. And again, we are going to see how to animate them in a minute. Now, something that is interesting about this is that if you want a specific color, let's say I want this blue to become yellow, so I can start looking for the yellow here and playing with the colors to see if I can find it. maybe around here. Okay, I found the yellow, but maybe I want it brighter, or I want something different here. So I will have to be tweaking all these numbers until I get to the actual color I want. But if I use the eyedropper here, I can just drag this anywhere on the screen and I can say, okay, I want this particular yellow. So I got that, alright? And the software automatically calculated the numbers for me to reach from this blue to reach this exact yellow. So now if I paint, the more pressure I put, the more yellow this is going to be. Alright, so we get this. Another tip about the brushes is that if I open this brush window again, I can select a different stamp here, right? But if I select another brush, this brush, for instance, it has its own numbers, its own values. So basically I lost all the values that I had set for the color drift and for the brush itself. So this can be, I mean, if you don't want this, it can be annoying. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to cancel this. Okay, I will select this shape to get these values again. So with the select shape tool, I just click on it and now I have this brush again here. And what I can do is I can open the window again, and instead of just clicking over the stamp, I will hold Alt and I will click over any stamp. And what the software is going to do is it will keep all the values that I have already set up here, but it will apply them to the new stamp. So I keep the color drift, I keep the spacing, the jitter angle, everything here. So let's say, I don't know, I want this brush instead. And maybe now I want to modify the values a little bit. So I want more jitter angle here, and maybe more spacing. Maybe I want some size variation amplitude here to modify the thickness across the line. And maybe I want this also to boil. So I will set, I don't know, I want it to boil every 3 frames. So now I'm happy with this. And now if I paint with this, it will use that brush. And if I hit play, it will also boil every 3 frames. Now, another tip I want to show you here, because let me actually change the brush again. Maybe this one. Yeah, maybe something like this. If I change the color of this brush, and actually let me draw something so you can see it better. If I select this stroke with the select shape tool, and I come here and I change the color of this, you can see that the blue is becoming yellow. But if I change it to another color, for instance, if I change it to pink, you can see it is going from pink to this other kind of yellow. Okay, and if I go to red, the red is going to blue here, and this one is going to orange. So you can see how the secondary color changes in a relative way to the original color I have. So it worked when I had blue, it went to green, but if I change this, it goes to a different color, because if I hit OK here, you can see that the same values are being applied here, but a hue of -38 applied over green will give you this red and not the other yellow. That's basically it. And the idea behind this is that if I reset this, I will set all this to 0. If I change, for instance, the value only, because I want the color to be darker, the more pressure I apply to the pen. So if I want it to be darker and maybe less saturated, and maybe I want to change the hue, but not too much, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4%. So now I have green and I have darker green, and I can paint with this, and you can see how it works. But now if I change the color, so let's say I want to paint yellow now the yellow is also becoming darker, or if I want this color instead, it's also becoming darker. So basically I can change the color of my brush and I will always get a darker result the more pen pressure I apply. So I don't need to be setting up this for every single color, because these values are going to be always making the color darker. It doesn't matter what color I pick. Now another tip, let's say you pick this color here and you want it to be, I don't know, blue, the secondary color to be blue. You could come here and you could change the hue to make it blue, or you could use the eyedropper here to make it blue. But something that is cool is that if you use this eyedropper here, I don't need to open the brush window. So if I drag this, normally I can pick the original color, let's say green, but now if I hold Alt or Option on the Mac, if I hold Alt here and drag, I will pick the secondary color. So let's say I want this to be the secondary color, maybe something different, maybe something more, okay, red or orange, something like that. So I just pick the secondary color, and you can see in the preview here that the secondary color is orange. So I can just paint and I can go from green to orange. So you don't need to be constantly opening this window. You can just hold Alt and change the color to whatever you want. Another thing I want to show you is that if I draw something here, let me just draw maybe like this. Alright, I have this line here, and I told you we can modify this, so I will zoom in here and I can modify the points here, but I can also modify the curvature, the thickness. If I use let me just remove the magnet mode here. If I use the line width tool, I can drag over any point left or right to make it smaller or bigger, so that works over every single point here. But now this tool also controls opacity and color drift. So if I hold shift and I drag over a point, I can make it more transparent or more opaque, so you can see how it changes here. And if I hold Alt and Shift and I drag this, I can make the color drift to be stronger or weaker. So you can see if I go to the left, it becomes green, which is the original color, and if I hold Alt and Shift and drag to the right, it will become purple. Alright, so you have control over every single point here. And also, if you use the magnet mode, I can just click here on the magnet mode. I'm still using the line width tool. With Alt and dragging, I can make the magnet bigger or smaller. So now I can control several points at the same time. So let's say I want to reduce the opacity, so I can hold Shift and reduce the opacity of many points at the same time. So I can just go here and start dragging and reducing the opacity, so I don't need to go point by point for that. And the same happens with the color drift. I can hold Alt and Shift and just change the drift of many points at the same time. So you can use also the magnet tool here. So now I got this. Let me just hide the vectors so you can see it. So it really looks like a bitmap now, but it is all vector. And since it is all vector, I can go to any frame. You can see it is boiling actually because I gave it also the boiling property. But I can go to any frame, and let's say I want to animate the opacity. I will just hold Shift here and I will reduce the opacity and maybe increase the opacity of this one there, and maybe reduce also that. So now you can see I have a new channel here, which is the brush opacity channel, and you can see how I have an animation of the opacity going down. So I can move this keyframe, I can modify it, I can save it also into a smartphone, so you can control the opacity with a smartphone. And the same happens with the color drift. Let me just remove this. And now if I hold Alt and Shift, I can modify, increase or reduce the color drift. And that is also going to create another channel. This is the brush color drift. And you can see how the color is changing here. So how do you apply this to a smartphone, for instance? If I open this tandem mice, these characters were created with this new brush. And you can see how they are boiling and they are animated, but they are all vector actually. And you can see here all the bones working. And for instance, if I rotate this, you can see how the wheel rotates and everything boils and everything moves here. But let's do a smart bone here. So for instance, this is the smart bone that rotates the head of this character, okay? So I'm going to open the actions window. I have this smart bone selected, so I can see highlighted the two actions related to this bone. So I can open one of them, and you can see this is the action that rotates the head a little bit, like that. So now I can select the helmet, for instance. You can see how the helmet is actually just vectors painted. And I can select, let's say I will select these points with the select point tool, and now I will go to the line width tool and I will hold Alt and Shift, and I will increase the color drift to make this darker. Okay, so now I have this animation. The character is rotating, but also the brush is going darker there because it's applying more color drift. And maybe I will take some points at the top and I will make them lighter here. Okay, so now this is happening, and this is saved into a smart bone. So now if I go to the main line and I select the bone layer, you can see that I can control this change by just rotating this bone, and you can see how the brush is changing there. So you can save that. Basically in Moho, every single channel can be saved into a smartphone. Now, let me just open a new file again, because I have been showing to you. Okay, now let's go from yellow to red. Okay, I want this. So right now, everything is related to the pen pressure. Okay, if you have a pen, you can apply this. If you don't have a pen, you have an option here. If you are using the freehand tool, you can see the options here for the freehand tool, and we have the width of the stroke, and it is controlled by the pen pressure here. But maybe I don't want the width to change, so I can set it to none here. So now the width is always going to be the same. It doesn't matter how much pressure I apply here. Or I can set it to random, and the random will play with this number. I will explain you later about this number, but the bigger this number is, the more range of change the brush will have. So now the pressure is changing, but it's changing randomly. I am not controlling that with the pen. So if you are drawing with your mouse, let me just use my mouse now. If I am drawing with the mouse, you can see how the thickness is changing while I draw. Now, since I am drawing with the mouse, the opacity and the color drift didn't change at all, because the mouse doesn't have any pen pressure. Okay. So let me just go back here, and I will set also the opacity to be random, and maybe we'll increase this number. Again, I will explain you about these numbers in a minute. But now I can draw here, and the opacity is going to change. So maybe I can reduce this. Let me take a look here. So it's not changing that much, so maybe we'll increase it a lot. Alright. So yeah, now it's changing more. So if I am using the mouse here, you can see how the opacity is changing while I am drawing. So this is random, and now the same can happen with the color drift. So if I set this to random, now the thickness, I'm still using the mouse here, but the thickness, the opacity, and the color drift will change randomly. Okay, so you can still use the mouse and get that kind of effect. Now let me explain the numbers here. I will just reset this, and let's start with only opacity. So I will set the line width and the color drift to none. And this number, this 100%, is the range of opacity. So depending on how much pressure I put to the pen, it will go from more transparent to more opaque. So now I have like a full range. Let me actually change the color of the stroke to get something more visible. So now I can go from very transparent to very opaque using the pen pressure. Now, we decided to give the user the freedom to modify this value, so you can go from 0, for instance, or for something very low, maybe not 0, but maybe 20%. So when you have 20%, the opacity is not going to change too much. Okay, so you can see even when I apply lower pressure, I still don't have changes on the opacity like this. So a lower number will mean less changes in the opacity, but a bigger number, when it is bigger than 100, so let's say 140, that will mean that the transparency is going to be more sensitive. So I will have to put more pressure to get the full opacity of this. So now even when I drew here, there are lines that are fully invisible, okay, because this pressure wasn't enough to actually show the brush. So you can play with these values, and you can go crazy, like you can go to 500% or something like that, and probably your brush is not going to be visible until you put a lot of pressure there. And also another thing that you can do here is that you can also go to negative numbers. So I will type here minus 100, and when I do that, something weird is going to happen. If I apply low pressure, I am not pressing much here, I will have full opacity, but if I apply pressure, then it's going to become more transparent. And if I apply full pressure now, it is fully transparent here. Let me show you the vector, so you can see there are points here, but they are not really visible. So you are inverting the values here. So we wanted to give the users this freedom, because maybe they will find something fun or something useful to do with this inverted value. So we decided we are not going to limit this from 0 to 100%. The user can put whatever number they want. So let me just go back to normal 100% here. And now I want to show you something similar, but in this case with the color drift. So if I set the color drift to use the pen pressure, If I have 100% here, it will go from the range of the original color to the secondary color drift color. So depending on how much pressure I put, I will get more or less of the secondary color, and that makes sense. Now, if I increase this number beyond 100%, that will mean that the software is going to use more of the color drift. So even if I apply less pressure, the secondary color is going to be more important here. Okay, so I need to paint like very lightly to get the original color here. And if I do the opposite, if I go lower than 100%, then the original color is going to be the priority here. So things are going to be more blue than green. And even if I apply a lot of pressure, it's very hard for me to get to the green color now. So you can play with these values, and you can set up that maybe while you are drawing, you want to prioritize one color or the other. You can play with this. And also, in the same way the opacity works, you can set this number to be negative. So let's say minus 100% is going to be the total opposite. So instead of being the primary color here, blue, I mean, if I don't apply much pressure, it's going to be green. And if I start applying more pressure, it's going to be blue. So you can see how that changes. So basically it's applying the color drift in a negative or in an inverted way. Alright, so let me just turn this off for now. And the same happens with the line width. So the default value here is 75. So the more I press, the bigger or the thicker the line is going to be. But I can even go to negative, so I could say negative 75. And now the result is going to be kind of weird, because the less pressure I put, the thicker the line is going to be, and the more pressure I put, the thinner this is going to be. So someone was saying like, oh, this is cool, this is like a spray can. The closer I am to the wall, the smaller the size of the thing I am painting will be. So it's basically something like that. So maybe you will find something fun or something good or some good use to this. If you don't care about this, you can just go to the normal colors. I can actually reset this, and now everything is back to normal. Alright, there are a few more things I want to show you about the freehand options. And this is that if let me just set all this to none. I can set that the beginning and the end of the line starts or end thinner. So let's say 0%. So now it doesn't matter what I draw, it will always be thinner at the beginning and at the end. So you can see how it creates that effect. Alright, and I can apply the same. Let me just disable this one. I can apply the same for the opacity. So the stroke is always going to start with less opacity. So in this case, it's not using the pen pressure for that, it's just defining that the opacity at the beginning and the end of the line is going to be lower. So now let me just go back to the normal settings here. And this is not related to the new features, but I want to show you this because I think it is important, especially if you are going to start painting more with Moho. The first thing is the smoothing setting. This setting is by default in this position, but if I increase this is going to smooth the line. So if I draw, you can see it feels a bit like a rope. So it tries to smooth the line. So let's say I am drawing some very shaky straight line. You can see how the software tries to keep it straight even when I was shaking a lot here. I don't know how visible that is, but the software is trying to make that smoother. This is a very extreme value. Okay, the default value is smooth things a little bit, but not too much. The idea is to get something as close as possible to what you are actually drawing. If you don't want smoothing at all, you can just turn it off by moving it here. So now things are going to be way closer to what you are actually drawing. Now, another thing that is very important is the point reduction value. The normal value here is 15%, and what this does is that when you draw vectors, the vectors, they can contain a lot of points. So the software tries to remove some of those points, keeping the line as accurate as possible. So we think 15% is a pretty good value because we can draw something, and if you look at the points, we don't have too many points here. If I reduce this value, let's say I reduce it to 2%, and I draw something similar, the drawing is going to be more accurate, but you can see how many points the software created. So depending on what you want, you will need more or less points probably. If you want to be very accurate, then you can reduce this number. I think 2% is too low. I don't recommend you to do that ever, but maybe you can move between 10 or 15%. So you can see with 10 how many points we have. Alright, we have a little bit more than the other one. if you want to be very extreme, or you don't care too much about the amount of points, you can go higher with this value, let's say 51. And now the software is going to reduce the points a lot. So you can see here we have almost only points at the extremes of the lines. So you can play with that. So how do you apply this to an actual project? And this is actually an advice. If you are painting something, let's say you are painting a character, I recommend you to use a high point reduction if you are painting something like this, let's say, right? Because in this case, it doesn't matter really how many points this has. You are not painting something very detailed. It's more like these brush strokes that are coming here. For instance, if you have seen the example of the wolf that we shared on social media, the wolf is painted in this way. So I don't need too many points. And actually many of the lines here, if you look at them, they have like only 2 points, one at each extreme, and that's it. So why it is important to reduce the amount of points you are using is because the brushes in Moho, they can be animated, and this is a special thing that comes with Moho. So you can change the curvature, the position, the thickness, the opacity, the color drift. You know, you can change all these things, and you can animate all these things and save them in smartphones and all that. So basically 1 point is storing a lot of information. It's storing the position, the curvature, the line width, the color drift, the opacity, and probably some more information I am missing now here. So basically you are storing all that information in the points. So if you have many points, then that will affect the performance at some moment, because the software needs to calculate and save too many points. So if you are using like 2% of point reduction and you paint the same, you will get basically the same visual result. But look at the amount of points. This is going to affect your project at some point. And also, it will be more annoying to animate this, because now you will have to deal with so many little points. And even when you can use the magnet tool and move several points at the same time, this is not ideal for working. And if you are rigging for someone else, that person is probably going to hate you because you have so many points here. So you need to find that balance. We believe that balance is around 15%, which is the default, but you can of course modify that. One extra thing I want to show you is that if you are not using the freehand tool, let's say you are using the add point tool. So with the add point tool, I can create a line like this, and now I can use the create shape tool to create a shape for this. And you can see that the points I have here, they only show the original color, and this is because they don't have opacity applied to them, and they don't have any color drift applied to them. So if I want to modify that, I can go to the line width tool. Let me just disable the magnet mode here, and of course I can modify the thickness or the opacity. And if I hold Alt and Shift, I can modify the color drift. So I got this. And of course I can animate all this. So you don't need to actually work with the freehand tool to get these values, but you will have to edit them later. The same thing happens if you draw a circle, for instance, with only stroke. I will get a circle here, but it doesn't have any color drift or any opacity. So I will have to apply that myself. So now I got this. Alright, now something similar happens with the negative numbers here, or the numbers over 100%. Let me show you here with the circle. If I use the line width tool and I hold Shift, I can increase the opacity up to 100% and as low as 0%. Let me just go to 100% here, and I'm going to lower this to 0%. Now, if I have a point selected and I go here to the opacity value, I can go even lower than 0%. I can go negative here. And if I start moving this, you can see that the gradient here starts to get closer to the next point. So you can play with that too. And sometimes you get like a nicer gradient, or something that looks more natural, that instead of going back to the exact position where the point is, it's going a bit lower. So it is compressing that gradient a little bit. And I can do the same with the next point. If I select this point, I can set the opacity higher than 100%. So now this one is also pushing the color here. So you can see the gradient is different here. So now I have this animation already happening there. So again, we wanted to give the option for the users to play with this. And you can even do some crazy stuff. Maybe you want the opacity to be negative here, And you can even do the same with the color drift. This is harder to explain or to or to understand, because with the color drift you can go to 100% or to 0%, but you can even go bigger than 100% by dragging here, and you can see how this is coming closer to the next point. So you can play with these values too, but you can also go negative, and you will get some weird results probably, but we were thinking maybe these weird results could be useful for some projects. So now you can see the negative color drift is doing some crazy stuff here, and you can get that animation already working. So you can play with all these numbers, and you can play with numbers bigger than 100% and lower than 0%. Now I want to show you two techniques that people were very interested on them on the trailer we released for Mantis Shrimp. So I want to show you how it works. One of them is the smoke made with brushes. So we show this file and we show this smoke, and it looks very complex, but it actually is extremely simple. So I'm going to select the shape of this smoke just to copy all the properties these brushes have. So I will create a new file here, and I will create a new line. I will just create a line with the add point tool. So if I create a line here and if I paint it, you can see this line has the brush. It doesn't have any transparency or color drift. But if I move one extreme of the line, you can see that I am increasing or reducing the amount of stamps here. So you can see how more stamps are appearing the longer this line is. But if I take the other extreme, you can see something different happens. The new stamps start appearing from the other extreme here. So now it feels like if I put this here for instance, it feels like the stamps are traveling up here. Okay, so we are going to use this. This is not an official feature, but we are going to use it to create something. So I'm going to add more points to this line. I'm going to create a point here and maybe another point here. Alright, and now I'm going to play with the thickness. So I want to make this thicker, maybe this one thinner, maybe this one thicker there. And now I'm going to play with the transparency. So this top point is going to be fully transparent. So I will just reduce the transparency here, and the same for this one. So basically now what I am seeing is only this section of the brushes, because this section on the top is not visible. And now I'm going to apply some color drift here to make it more red there. Okay, something like that. So now what I can do is I can go to any frame and I can move this point up, and I can get this kind of effect of smoke going up. So now if I want to animate this, the easiest way, you could just create a keyframe around here and move it up, and you will get the animation working there. But I really love to do cycles, so I'm going to do a cycle instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a frame for this point on frame 1, and now maybe on frame 25 I will move this up. Okay, and now I will select this keyframe, right click it, and I will create a cycle for it. Okay, when I create a cycle for this, the cycle is going to repeat that animation. You can see how the point is going up and then coming back down and up again, and so on. But instead of doing that, I want this cycle to be additive. So when the cycle is additive, the point continues going up forever. So let me just zoom out here. You can see how that point is traveling there. It's traveling up, up, up. So I don't need to care about that point anymore. And the other thing that you can apply here is that the movement of this point, the interpolation is smooth. So it has some acceleration happening. So that will look weird in the cycle because the smoke is moving like at a different speed during the animation. So I can change that. I can select this first keyframe and I can set this to linear, and now the smoke is going to move in a linear way, so it's always going to have the same speed. And the other nice thing about using additive cycles is that I can take this keyframe and I can move it to the right if I want the cycle to be slower, or move it to the left if I want the cycle to be faster. So you can play with that, and you can even do stuff like, let me just undo this. You can do stuff like select this first keyframe and maybe you want the cycle to move on 2s. So you can set the interval to 2s, and now the cycle is going to move on 2s. Alright, and finally, with this example, I can duplicate this layer. I can select the shape. I can open the brush settings, and I can change the brush. I'm going to hold Alt to change only the stamp. So maybe I'm going to use this brush instead. All right. And now maybe I'm going to right click the layer and set a blend mode. So maybe this is going to be an overlay. You can see how it is affecting the layer. So now the lighting looks different here. And maybe I can even change the color of this smoke. Maybe I want something greener. I know it doesn't look like actual smoke or something, but you can imagine whatever you want here. So let's say I want this to be greener. So now this layer is affecting the other one in a different way, and we have some nice colors happening here. So we have that. Alright, so only with 2 layers now we have a more complex effect. It looks more something like coming under the water, I guess. And if I want to modify this animation, I can select these 2 layers and I will see the keyframes for both. So I can make it faster or slower or do whatever I want. So now this one is slower now. Alright, so this is the technique, and you can play with this. The line doesn't need, let me just hide this one. The line doesn't need to be straight. You can play with this. You can modify this in any way you want, and you will get a similar effect anyway. Okay, so yeah, it can be interesting. And the other thing, finally, I want to show you is that if you see the intro to the Mantis Shrimp, you see how all these letters are being drawn during the animation, and that effect is actually very simple. Let me just pick yellow here again. So if I draw with the freehand tool, let me just pick another brush here. Let's say this one. Maybe going to red. Okay, I like when it goes to red. So if I paint here, I can just draw and paint like Moho. Start drawing here. Okay, so I have Moho here, and now what I can do is I can select all the points of this drawing. I can go to any frame. Let's say I want this animation to start on frame 24. So I go to frame 24, and now I can go to scripts, draw, animated strokes. So when I select this, it will ask me the duration of the animated stroke. So maybe I want this to be animated during 50 frames. So when I press OK, now this Moho word, let me just hide this, is going to appear and to draw itself from frame 24 up to frame 70 something. So you have the Moho word being drawn here. And I can select all these keyframes and I can make this to happen faster or slower. I just select the keyframes, I hold Alt, and now I drag the last keyframe to the right or to the left. So maybe if I want it slower, I can do that. And now you can see how this is all moving. So in this case, this is not boiling, so I'm going to select. This is actually new too. With the select shape tool, you can activate the lasso mode. So you can just select all the shapes with the lasso mode, and I will apply some line boil here. So I want it to boil every 3 frames, and I press OK. So now it's going to be drawn and boiling at the same time. So yeah, you have that effect. So it is that simple. So you spend some time drawing the words and then just use that script to make them appear. Okay, this is a long tutorial, but I was very excited about showing you all this stuff. I hope this was useful. I hope you enjoyed the tool, and please, if you create something, please remember to tag us on any social media you're using. We are at Moho Animation. You can also use the hashtag Moho Animation, and we will be very happy to see this. And also, if you are watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and like and all that YouTube stuff. Alright, thank you for watching. Bye.